Thank you. Yes, I'm delighted to be presenting this research today because I love presenting qualitative stuff. So I'm just going to start by introducing the team who worked on this. Lauren Smith was a master's student, so this was very much something that she centred on in her work. And then there was myself, Orla here, and also Catherine. We're all involved in the analysis, and we've been involved in writing the paper that you're going to see today. And also just to refer to the title, I love starting with a quote. And this quote, I think, really summed up what we got from these focus groups. There's no college to help you become a dad. It was great that a participant said that because that very much summed up what we found. So what we did for this, we conducted focus groups with fathers and father figures using data from the implementation analysis that Louise mentioned earlier on. We made a decision to extend the study to father figures based on demographic information that we got at 24 months, which was that roughly 25% of mothers were not in a partnered relationship, and we knew from our understanding of this area and from working with the program implementation team themselves that there is some sensitivity around fathers and around father figures, and there is some fluidity in the area within family dynamics. So that's why we decided to extend it out a bit. What we know about fatherhood itself. Well, first of all, by the way, I apologise. We usually have a screen halfway down the room. We don't have it until lunchtime today because we've had a few IT issues. So apologies that this is so small for those of you down the back, but I'll try and translate it for you. Fathers can help develop certain things in children, like child cognitive functioning, enhance academic success, and reduce behavioural maladjustment. Now, they're all things that mothers can provide as well. They're things that any kind of good parenting can help in a child. But what's specific to dads that we know is that they have a thing called an activation relationship. Now, this was a term coined by Paquette, which suggests that dads kind of provide something extra. They're in a position to, and this seems to happen through the play element that they conduct with children. So there seems to be something new and something novel that a child can get from that relationship. We do know that in some cases, father absence may lead to psychological difficulties in children. Such difficulties can include internalising behaviours, externalising behaviours. So that is something we're concerned about. We also know fatherhood has changed over time. So what we expect of fathers is quite different now from what it might have been 20 or 30 years ago, going from the kind of breadwinner perspective through to the more nurturing co-parenting role that we see today. Father-child interaction can be influenced by a number of different factors. It can be influenced by the relationship with the mother, with the family in general. It can also be influenced by human and financial resources, so who you have around you to support you, and also the financial resources available to you. In general, the rule is that higher SES fathers, or higher SES families, would have improved father-child interactions. Now, in terms of the father figures, there's quite a dearth of literature on father figures themselves, but we do know that children benefit psychologically from having a father figure in their lives, whether that father figure is biological or not. So we know that there is some work to say that actually having a sort of a male role model in their lives does help children psychologically. Now, down to the home visiting programs. Again, there's a lack of literature on father participation in and outcomes from home visiting programs. Typically, there's kind of a habit that people fall into whereby if they're developing a home visiting program, they tend to start focusing on the mother, even if the father is living in the home and the program is designed to focus on the whole family. So it's kind of a pitfall that can happen in the home visiting area. Also, father involvement in home visiting programs has a number of influences on it. It's influenced by the child, father and mother characteristics. But the literature on that is mixed. So in some cases, certain characteristics could influence it for the better. We'd have more father involvement. In other cases, it influences it negatively. So the literature is very mixed on sort of what can actually engage fathers in the home visiting programs. Currently, there's a bit of a move on by home visiting programs to try and engage fathers. And in 2 studies of Early Home Start, which is a big US program, they found that the majority of fathers had had some contact with the program. So this tells us that there is potential for father participation in intervention programs like Preparing for Life. So this leads us to our research questions. So we wanted to know really, what is it like to be a father or a father figure in the PFL community? And what do fathers or father figures think of PFL, and how do they perceive their involvement with PFL? Now, I should say, from here on in, if I mention father or father figure, I really mean fathers. I mean the whole group. So I mean either. I might use the terms interchangeably, but I mean the whole group that we looked at, which I'm going to go into now. So we conducted focus groups or interviews with fathers and father figures of children in the PFL high and low treatment groups. The reason I say focus groups or interviews is that it came up at a meeting with the implementation team that in some cases, of course, we were going to get a scenario where we'd invite a certain number of fathers to participate, but of course, only a few would show up. And what were we going to do if just 2 showed up? So we made a decision that if just 2 fathers showed up, we would give them the opportunity to do semi-structured interviews on their own, or to leave, and they would still get, all of them got compensation of a €20 shopping voucher. So they didn't have to stay if they didn't want to, and they would still receive that compensation. Or they could participate in a focus group with just 2 participants, or they could do semi-structured interviews, 1 each. So for that reason, we always had 2 moderators. We were able to change it into that if we had to. We had 6 in the high treatment and 4 in the low treatment group, and of those, we had 2 father figures in each. So first group was 4 fathers, 2 father figures, second was 2 and 2. We recruited them via the PFL mothers. Again, we had a lot of discussion around how to contact them, and in conjunction with the implementation team and with our own experience of the area, we decided going through the mothers was best, because this would eliminate any sensitivity with trying to directly contact fathers. We had contact information from the beginning of the programme. We didn't necessarily want to assume that contact information for the fathers was still relevant. So we sent all the mothers a letter. Enclosed was included a second letter for fathers, and we said we're going to call them a male role model. So we said anyone over 18 who has a father-like role in the child's life. That could be the father, the mum's partner, the stepfather, the uncle, a granddad, a big brother, a cousin, or any other male who is a role model for the child. So it was up to the mother to define that and to pick the person. There was a very low uptake, unsurprisingly. 182 families were eligible for this. Out of this, 72 outright refused, and the others just didn't respond to repeated contact attempts. The focus group lasted 30 to 60 minutes in duration, and as I said, they were moderated by 2 trained researchers. We held them within the local community, so the fathers and the father figures were very familiar with the area that we held them in, and we used a semi-structured interview schedule that we developed for it, and we offered the individual interviews when we had to. So the participants were fathers and father figures, as I said. The father figures we got included grandfathers, a step-grandfather, and an older brother. They were mostly Irish, but also we had some European and Asian fathers. And the age range it was huge. It was from 19 to 59. Obviously, that takes into account little brother or big brother and grandfather. And there were 2 where the age was unknown, but they were older participants, so we imagined that would push the age up a bit. We analysed it thematically, inductively and deductively. So what that means is, with the inductive analysis, we looked at all the data and saw what it was telling us without any agenda. But we also wanted to know specifically about the PFL programme itself. So for that, we did some deductive analysis. We went through it and checked specifically for instances where PFL was referred to. We used a team of 3 researchers to do the analysis, which is kind of compliant with the specific guidelines that have been set out for Braun and Clark in 2006 and 2013. So on to the results. There were 3 themes that came out. The first was the unfolding role of fatherhood. The second was influential factors, supports and challenges. And the third was about the PFL programme, an opportunity for change. I'll go through each one of these in detail now. So the first theme was the unfolding role of fatherhood. This very much suggested that fatherhood was something organic that developed over time, started off as an adjustment, and then there was an awareness and a build-up into a kind of a multifaceted, complicated role. But underpinning it all was this value about putting children first. So this is our first quote. The adjustment to the new role, as I summed it up the other day, it's kind of like, boom, you're a father. There's a bit of a shock. Suddenly you have to make a big change, and it's instant, and it's something you have to react to very quickly. So in this case, the participant said, it is hard. For 15 or 20 years, you're just looking after you. That all of a sudden, someone comes along, and it's totally them for the next 20 years or so. It's a tough mental thing. I should explain before I go on, HT at the end means this was a high treatment participant. LT means it's a low treatment participant. We started analysing them separately, and we found that they were very similar. So all the themes relate to both high and low treatment, and I'll pull out when there's a difference between the 2. Yeah. So in this case, the role was very complicated, very multifaceted. There was an awful lot to it. The main thing that came out was that the role of playmate. These participants felt very much their role was to have fun with the child. They felt this provided a service to the child in that they did rough and tumble activities. As this participant said, I'm a big thing for rough play, the tumbling and the wrestling and all, because she needs that kind of bonding with the father. And that was a high treatment participant. So the idea is that they felt they were sort of doing something specific that was helping their child. Also, it helped them. It was a wind down from work. So often when the father or the father figure came in the door from work, they got to do something totally different, and that was play with their child. They felt it was good for the child. The second role was the disciplinarian. Very different. They didn't like this at all. They felt it required a lot of teamwork and a lot of planning, and it wasn't easy. But it was something they were willing to do. In this situation, for example, the participant just said, my daughter can be a bit bossy. You try to kind of dim that down, say thank you, please, don't push your brother. They all spoke about different ways in which they disciplined their child. This is one quote summarising a whole lot behind it. But in general, it was something that they had thought about a bit and something that they'd focused on with the child's mother to figure out a way of disciplining. The next role was that of teacher. So they tended to use an activity to teach their child something. In this case, for example, the father figure said, I'll sit there and watch documentaries on wildlife, and he'll sit there and watch them, and what I love about him is he'll ask questions. So in that case, he was using the example of watching telly to kind of teach the child something. Other things that came up were getting the child involved in scouts or sports. So the father figures were thinking about how we can teach them and get our children to learn things all along. The final role that came up strongly was provider. So fathers felt very much under pressure to provide for the child. They led to a kind of a catch-22 scenario because they had limited time with their child because they were so busy working to try and provide. So in this case, the father says, I work day and night and I mightn't see the kids. I got home, they'd be in bed maybe. Another thing to mention at this juncture is that obviously a lot of the fathers and father figures, because of the complicated family dynamics that could go on in a community like this, they might be dealing with multiple generations. They could have teenagers, they could have children in their 20s, and also young children. If they're a grandfather, they have the experience of fathering as well from their own experience. So they were discussing that too. So underpinning all of these roles and underpinning becoming a father and this unfolding role that's developing was this value that, of course, the child must come first. In this case, it was not very easy. So the participant said, sometimes you come home from work, you just want to lie down and relax and have that hour to yourself. It's the kids always first, then it's the child's mother, and then it's me. So you just have to put your own needs, basically, was what he was saying, to the background. So this role was constantly in their head, that they had to kind of have this focus of putting the child first, with an aim to a good future for the child. And that aim was, I'd like them to have a better life and a better education and get a good job out of it and be happy all the time in what they're doing. And that was a low treatment participant. So on to our next theme. The fathers and father figures were very much impacted by a number of different factors. Some welcome, some unwelcome. Some were supportive, some were challenging. And they were constantly being buffeted and pushed around by these different things. But in some cases, they were positive and they were helping. So the factors included their own parents, then their own family, so maybe their partner, the mother of the child, and the children themselves, the PFL program itself, potentially other fathers, and I'll discuss that in more detail in a minute, work, which we just touched on, and the neighbourhood is the small one you probably can't see there, and society. So I'll go through these now in turn. In terms of their own parents, this could be positive or negative. So in some cases, they were saying that it was really good. They learned things from their dad, they thought back to their own parents. In other cases, they wanted to change it. In other cases, they said, I want to be different. I don't want to work the way they did. In this case, the participant said, I always thought I was going to be different than my own dad. Now when I look back, I kind of think, oh, he done an all right job, and I'm turning into my dad, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So in this case, being a father, going through fatherhood, I kind of make him reevaluate slightly his own relationship with his father. In terms of the family as an influential factor, well, this very much was quite emotive. In some cases it was good, in some cases it was bad. They spoke about the support of having older children. So in this case, the participant said, they all take part in the child's upbringing in a sense when they're there. So the older children could help provide a sort of a semi-parental role to children. In the next case, this participant was sort of stuck because the child's mother was putting the role of disciplinarian onto him. So he said, he'll cry and call for me, and I have to be the bad guy. I'd have to say, no, you can't, listen to the child's mother. That kind of hurts a bit because I want the freedom to do what I want to do. So in this case, it was a bit more challenging. In the third case, this was a participant where the father figure wasn't actually living with the family, but was very much involved with them on a day-to-day basis. And he said, everything I've taught him when he's up with us goes out the window on the way home in the car, because everything at home is completely different. Moving on to the PFL program as an influential factor. This is very much coming from the high treatment participants. The low treatment participants understandably didn't have as much to say. But the high treatment participants said positive things like PFL. The first one said, it gives you that kind of boost to keep doing what you're doing, you know, that you're doing something right. So in this case, It was helping him in terms of his fathering. In the next case, it's interesting because he did the program. He participated in Triple P, which is the parenting program. But what he said was, when I did Triple B, I calmed down an awful lot now. It was good to come here. You can let off a bit of steam and grand. But then he said, as soon as I go back in the house, then boom, friction again. So while it really helped him on a temporary level, then he was sort of stuck with some problems thereafter. The next influential factor, or potential influential factor, was other fathers. So the high treatment participants and the low treatment participants spoke about wanting to connect more with other fathers. They felt this piece was missing from the different things that influenced them in becoming a dad. So this particular father, for example, said, then there'd be more information thrown about, things they, another dad, could do for their child. You could take that feedback and go back and try and implement it with your child and see if they like it. So they were kind of looking for an influence from other dads that they felt they didn't get, and they commented that the mothers really had that. They would network in with other mothers and talk to them about what it was like. The last influential factor is work. So this is the kind of catch-22 I spoke of. So this isn't really perfect, but the idea is that they go to work because they feel they have to provide. This leads to a lack of time, which leads to a compromise role. What they do in that compromise role is they focus on play. So if you like, the child's mother or other primary caregiver might have done all the rest, and they come in and go, right, this is my niche, this is what I can do. But then the other issue with the work thing is that they can miss the PFL bits. They might go on during the day, they're missing that. So they're kind of missing out on quite a bit of the childcare and of learning about childcare because they're so busy trying to provide. The next thing is the neighbourhood. So obviously it's a disadvantaged area, as we learned earlier on from Louise. And this was an influential factor in terms of how the fathers parented. So in this case, he said, she watches far too much TV, in fairness, because where we live, if I let my young one out, I'd be constantly out. You'd have to be with her. So in this case, the child couldn't really go outside because of the disadvantaged nature of the neighbourhood. And the final factor is society more at large. So in this case, there was a lot of discussion around how fathers are perceived now, and a lot of insight into, how things have changed over time. So in the first case, it was positive. The low treatment participant said, I feel that now there's more fathers involved in their child's growing up, so you'll probably see a better developed child in the long run. However, in the next case, the participant, who was also low treatment, said, there's not really that much support anywhere. Now, interestingly, what he was talking about was other supports separate to PFL. So he was talking about maybe the more kind of governmental supports that are put on. And he said, there's not, like as I said, they're out doing everything we can do. Management of the house and the cleaning of it. There should be a natural awareness kind of that you can be a role model. So many men are pushed out of the way. So in this scenario, they needed help. They got it, but it wasn't the help he wanted. He wanted support to do what he knew he could do. So the final theme, as I mentioned, was more deductive. We looked for stuff on PFL. And what we found was that there was mixed awareness of the programme, with very much a high and low treatment distinction. So the high treatment participants typically knew more about it, the low typically knew less. But there were positive perceptions of PFL overall and enthusiasm for involvement. So in terms of the mixed awareness, I've focused here on the low treatment participants who knew less, but bear in mind there were high treatment participants kind of to match them who knew more. First participant said, I knew nothing about it, to be honest. I never really wanted to. All the letters, and my wife opens the post, and it's only that preparing for life thing, and I forget about it. In the next case, the participant says, what the idea, I believe, is it's monitoring the development of the kids. So in this case, he knew it was doing something, he didn't know quite what. However, as I said, they were very positive about PFL overall, and that was high and low treatment participants. So the first says it's a great support system for even single mothers, because PFL is kind of a father figure for the child. So in this case, they felt it was providing a sort of another supportive parental arm in the child room. The next one said, I had my skeptics at the start, but I have to say it's an absolutely brilliant program. I'd like to see it going on all the time, and it helps people and parents. It probably should have been here years ago in the area, in different areas. Again, this is a low treatment participant, so this is a participant who isn't getting the full intervention, and this was their take on it. Finally, there was enthusiasm for more involvement, so they wanted to do more, they wanted to be involved more in the program. The first one is a high treatment participant, so what he said was, I'd like to spend more time with her, with the mentor, so we can see what's going on, and to read the tip sheets, because by the time I get home, they'd probably be in the folder and I'd forget about it. So again, this was a sort of common thing that if, in some cases, the mentors had managed to schedule the visits in the evenings when typically the fathers would be at home. In cases where they hadn't done that, the fathers were saying, well, this is the barrier. The barrier is actually the time I'm here, and maybe they could be more involved if the visits were scheduled later. In the second case, a low treatment participant said, I want to get involved and find out what's happening, you know. Then I'll know what's what and I'll get involved. For the little lad, you know, for him, I'd do anything for him. So there are all the results. So just to conclude, as I said, the high and low treatment participants had very similar thoughts on being fathers or father figures to young children. So we didn't see a big difference in terms of that, in terms of fathering. They both felt the role was very multifaceted and challenging with multiple influential factors. So there are an awful lot of things at play at any one time. The barriers to interaction with the children, as identified by the participants, support what we saw in the literature. So there are things like work, time, relationships with other people. The father figures were very much supportive of PFL, but some of them felt a bit disconnected from it and offered suggestions for becoming more connected. Specifically, they'd like to be more involved with the mentors in the high treatment group, and all of them, both high and low treatment, suggested meeting other father figures through discussion groups. But as my colleague the other day said, this might be because they'd all taken part in a discussion group and liked it, and this is what they're into. So we have to temper that. So that's it.